Welcome, everybody. My name is Mari Fuentes Martin, and I'm the Vice President for Student Success and Engagement here at Texas A&M San Antonio. Excited to have our inaugural Loop podcast. And I'm going to introduce Mr. Zach Frankusiak to introduce our leaders on the panel.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Mari. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. In January, our host will mark 6 years as president of the fastest growing university in the state of Texas. From humble beginnings, she first started working as a bagger at a local grocery store. Now, she most recently contributed to Forbes magazine and has led her team against the Herculean challenge of moving over 1,000 core classes and dozens of student services to a virtual modality. This is the epitome of Flossom. The student experience is at the forefront of her consciousness and the center of her decisions, and she's on a mission to improve the trajectory of our students' families' lives. Creating the May Center for Experiential Learning and Community Engagement, the Cisneros Institute for Emerging Leaders, and the university's first Facebook Cybersecurity University program are a few initiatives that she's played a key role in building at A&MSA. Being solution-focused and a visible role model are high priorities for her, and her work ethic, grit, and leadership expertise have been recognized nationally and worldwide. In 2020, she was awarded the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnerships 2020 U.S.-Japan Public Intellectual, and in 2019, she was recognized as a Network for Change and Continuous Innovation's Top 20 Thought Leaders in Change and Innovation, the Top 40 Under 40 Professionals in Alaska by the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce and Alaska Journal of Commerce, and the Top 10 Professional Women of the Year from the Marjorie Mason Center. Among all of these professional awards, she's likely most proud of her roles as a wife to her husband of over 20 years and a mother of 2 successful men. I'm excited to introduce a woman that I personally admire, the leader, visionary, and president of our beloved university, Dr. Cynthia Teniente-Matson.
My goodness, Zach, thank you for that incredible introduction. I had no idea you were going to say all those wonderful things. Thank you, Mr. A&M San Antonio. I appreciate you being here with us today. And I have the honor to welcome Mayor Ron Nirenberg, one of my colleagues and someone that I look to for leadership, as all of us have during this terrible triad of circumstances that are before us. And so, Mayor, today with us is the President's Leadership Class. And today is the inaugural episode of our new podcast series, which I'm calling The Loop. And that stands for the Loop 410, the leadership loop, the connections that we make with each other in learning, leadership and learning, and this sort of feedback loop. And I'll be interviewing you today for the podcast, and I have some questions that are coming to us from our students. And we will be doing one of these podcast episodes once a month for the President's Leadership Class to have an opportunity to meet leaders, thought leaders like yourself, and to really learn and understand what it's like to face leadership, adversity, and what they can expect in their life going forward. So, Mayor, I want to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to this how you got to this post where you are now.
Well, thank you, Dr. Matson and Zach, and to Texas A&M San Antonio and the President's Council. It's great to be with you. I admire Dr. Matson very much and all the work that this team has done for the university. Texas A&M is no longer a best kept secret in South Texas anymore for San Antonio, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. My path to elected office was not straight and was not expected. In fact, when I was growing up and even into, I would say, graduate school, my goal was to become a journalist. And it's through that I started getting more involved in public affairs and public policy. And by the time I went to graduate school, I got involved in a national civic education program that was funded by the Pew Charitable Trust. And so for the first decade of my professional life, I worked in, at the Nirenberg Public Policy Center, running civic projects in 22 different cities across the country, particularly focused on municipal public policy, working with young people in high schools, as well as with media and public officials themselves, and examining how local government works examining how government works and providing curricula for it to be taught in schools by looking at local government and having students participate in it. I left that when we started a family, and I ended up going back to my alma mater here in San Antonio. I've been in San Antonio for the last 25 years and working for Nirenberg when I was in San Antonio. But when my wife and I started a family, I ended up going back to Trinity and worked there running a jazz radio station. And it wasn't until I started getting involved through that as a member of the arts community into a program called SA 2020 that I got more interested in furthering my involvement through public affairs in San Antonio. And I really decided to run for public office and took a chance on running for city council when I became a dad. And I came home one day and asked Erica what she thought if I ran for city council, because I got so interested and motivated by the visioning of San Antonio to impact Jonah, who's now 12, my son, and what we could do to build a great San Antonio that we could leave off to the next generation. So that was what made me motivated to run for office and get involved at this level, and here we are.
So, Mayor, some of the students on the panel, or the attendees, are freshmen, and some are seniors. And I mean, first time in college freshmen, that this is their first semester. Did you ever have moments as a student where you thought, college isn't for me, or this is too hard, or I made a mistake, or did you have to, were you one of these students? Some students know what they're going to do from the 9th grade, and they're just at the university as a delivery mode.
I didn't know what I was going to do until I had a son. And I think I turned 30 or 33, somewhere in there, that I found my path. But you know, when I was a first year in college, I was totally intimidated. So much so that I remember my entire first year of college, I basically locked myself in my room and regimented every 15-minute increment of my day to make sure that I could complete all the readings and assignments on time, because I just thought it was so overwhelming, the amount of work. And it wasn't, but what that experience did was teach me a studying habit and a way to get organized in my own day to ensure that I always came prepared to the classes. So you know, it was intimidating. My first year was a lonely experience, but it was during that period of intense focus that I think that I learned the work ethic that I needed to not only do well in college, but also, you know, do the job that I have today.
And were you involved in student government or student activities or clubs and sports, or were you involved engaged in anything?
Yeah, I was actually. The first day on campus, I remember I walked down to the basement of the campus publications office because I wanted to be a journalist. And so I said, I want to work. And they gave me an internship. That was where I immersed myself. My extracurricular in college was journalism and communications, the field in general. So I did print, I did radio, and I did television as well, a little bit. But my focus was on print journalism.
Wow, that's incredible. So yes, you've come now a long way from where you started on that. Do you write your own speeches?
It's a collaborative. Sometimes I write my own, but many times it's a collaboration between me and the team, kind of giving a framework, and then I put that in my own voice. But I do certainly finish my own speeches. So nothing that I say is not without, you know, me penning the final version, so to speak.
No, I completely understand that. So, you know, we've been living through this crisis. You've been front and center, both locally, statewide, and in some cases nationally. I want to turn to some questions that I have for you and some from the students themselves. And I want to talk a little bit about what appears to be a strong partnership between you and the county judge, Judge Wolf. How do you feel, first of all, is that true?
It is, absolutely is. And it's one of the takeaways that I think not only I have in this crisis moment, but I think that the city of San Antonio has. That's one of our strengths as a community, is teamwork. And that's been on full display between the city and the county during this crisis. And I think it's one of the reasons why we've fared much better than most.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, at least from the outside looking in. And how did you all come up with the idea to do these nightly broadcasts? I know lots of people are watching. I've told you I'm watching them. I discovered TVSA, which I didn't even really know existed, and I think we might even have content on there. But I watch them every night. Yeah.
Well, we had a lot of late night meetings as the pandemic was beginning with my team here and with the judge and with other members of the community. Gordon Hartman was our COVID-19 community coordinator, and we had a lot of discussions about meeting the moment. And one thing that kept coming around was the need for our community to hear a consistent message about what was going on, interpret the chaos that's going on out there. So there's a lot of reasons for the nightly briefings, but it was in that period of time where we talked about the fact that we need to be a consistent voice, which will provide some level of comfort, but also help interpret the chaos and provide a forum for the facts to be shared, because not all of them are pretty or comfortable. But they need to be shared, because it's in the sharing of that information and transparency that I think our community can build trust enough to listen to the experts, even when the experts, in this case our public health professionals, are telling us things that we don't necessarily want to hear, because the pandemic has not been a great experience. In fact, it's been a horrible experience. From a health perspective, we've lost over 1,000 of our loved ones and neighbors. Tens of thousands of people in our community have gotten gravely ill, and it's devastated our economy. There's not a way to get around those facts, but it's through that sharing and transparency that I think we've armed our community with what it needs to save as many lives as we can, get through this as best we can, and ultimately get on our feet stronger and more resilient in the best way that we can.
So let me take you back for a moment. When this first hit, it was through the cruise ships, right? The passengers. So some of our freshmen were in high school at that moment in time. Can you help us understand, like, sort of how did this unfold for you? It seems like forever ago now, doesn't it? But
yeah.
What were you thinking then, and what was your experience like with the federal government?
Well, it was really back in January that this began for the city of San Antonio. And at that point, it was a very isolated Department of Defense partnership. And, we're Military City USA. We have a strong partnership with Joint Base San Antonio. We have the largest concentration of defense and military assets outside of DC. And so our role was really to assist with the evacuations of Americans from Wuhan into bases in the country. And when they came back, they would be quarantined, so they wouldn't, they would stay on base, and they would be observed and made sure that nobody's sick, and then eventually they'd go back to their homes. And we had some difficulty with that. That mission also became part of the cruise ships, and so folks came to the joint bases through the cruise ships. We had challenges in communication with the CDC and with HHS at the state level initially. And then, all what broke out when one patient, no, I shouldn't say patient, one evacuee was released pending a test result that ended up turning up positive. And that person was gone, I think, for less than 12 hours, but ended up going to a mall, going to a hotel nearby, and so potentially exposed our public to the coronavirus. And that would have been, I mean, obviously that was national news at that point because we had no cases and very few places had cases in the United States. It turns out that was a great emergency drill for us to go through. We got the attention of the federal government. I got mad because there was that foul up with the federal government. And it allowed us an attention and a moment to focus what we needed to do to contain this virus. When it eventually reached America's shores for real. And so it turns out that evacuation mission, everybody left, everything was fine. There was no transmission of the virus from those evacuation missions. But eventually, I think several weeks later, we did get a case here in San Antonio in the general public, as we expected eventually. And it was a travel-related case from someone who had been traveling, I think, from California or New York. And that's when we actually, in a bona fide way, started the pandemic response in the general public. But we were on high alert, and that negative experience turned out to be a very important one for San Antonio.
You know, I read somewhere in the last few days, Mayor, that you were involved as a younger professional on 9/11. You had an experience there that surrounded you and how that helped inform you. Can you share some of that with our students about what you were thinking at the time, the journey you were on, and how that sort of played out to where you are today?
Well, of course, 9/11 is an important and tragic moment in American history. For those that lived through it, you'll remember it. It's seared into your memory wherever you were. For me, I was 24. And I was working at that with the Nirenberg Public Policy Center from San Antonio. One of our project sites, remember I mentioned 22 different cities, one of our project sites was New York City. And 9/11 happened to be primary election day in New York. And so we were ready with our film crew on site, ready to do video to provide for content in the schools about the local elections. And, it was the primary election of what would have been Mayor Michael Bloomberg. But once the planes hit, everything shut down. And Mayor Giuliani's tenure was extended under emergency circumstances. Our film crew, which was going to be filming local election activities, pivoted to start filming what was happening with local government in a crisis and following essentially Mayor Giuliani, and the documentary was entitled Mayors in a Time of Crisis. So I remember very clearly, and every city was reeling in some way from 9/11. We were also in Detroit, we were in Tulsa, San Antonio, Seattle, many different cities. But particularly New York City, I was able to observe how Mayor Giuliani handled himself, handled the city, provided a unifying voice and presence. Of course, that was Mayor Giuliani, and people know Rudy Giuliani in a much different way now. Oh. Let me put that caveat in there. This was a different time, and in my view, a different person, Mayor Giuliani. But he certainly set a mold for how you, as a mayor, deal with a incredible, unforeseen crisis that grips the entire country.
And as a young professional, so you were there on the site, part of the crew handling the documentary.
I was here in San Antonio, and my job was to start loading content for the students in all the schools in New York to see. We had a film crew there in New York. I would travel to and from New York on occasion. I wasn't there, thank God, in New York at the time, but all of our eyes and ears and crews were there.
But you were personally impacted. I mean, how tremendous to be a part of something that just completely went in a whole nother way that forever changed our world. Here at A&M San Antonio, and our students know this, many of them were there just last week when we had the 9/11 celebration for the 19-year anniversary. We have, I think you know this, Mayor, we have one of two of the seedlings. So there was one sole survivor tree on ground zero after that aftermath, and it produced a number of seedlings, and we have one of the two seedlings in the entire state of Texas here in A&M San Antonio. And they brought it to us on the 15th anniversary. and it was delivered to us by either survivors or family members of those who lost their lives, fire department workers and police department workers. So we had the opportunity to hear their story firsthand. Many students did. And so the tree has a big connection to Ground Zero. They check in on us regularly. We're part of that connection. So the 9/11 tribute is so fitting. And when I heard that about you, I wasn't aware of that. I thought I have to ask you about that in totality. So going through this journey that you've been through, things haven't always gone the way you wanted them to go with the governor and with national figures, which you've talked about a little. How do you reconcile that? How do you confront that? How do you deal with that as our representative leading our city?
Yeah, well, it's a challenge, and mixed messaging from the top, and I straight from DC, and even at the state level. I think has caused a lot of problems. There's no doubt. We saw a June and July spike in cases, and it was a deadly 2 months in July and August for us. Our result, in my opinion, of the politicization of this pandemic. If we are consistent with the public health message, and people, have the scientific data and the guidance from the public health professionals, we're all better off. So that's been our focus, is really to put the facts out there, get our medical professionals directly in front of people, provide the data that allows for people to see the impact of their behaviors. Because it is true, sometimes our orders have conflicted, and we've been shut down by the state on mask orders, for instance. At one point, they stripped that authority away from us. When Texas started to reopen back in April, we told them it's much too fast. Our public health professionals are telling us go through these stages methodically so you can see the results of each decision before you go on to the next phase of reopening. So it was too early, too fast. But we have, while we've shared that perspective, we've also made sure to say, okay, just because it may be okay, here's what the public health professionals are telling us to do. And when you've established trust with the public, when you've established trust with the neighbors, and you've reinforced the trust that they have for our medical community, you're able to provide guidance and not have to say, well, if you do this, you're going to be fined, or if you do this, you're breaking the law. You simply say, if you do this, you can save lives. And our community understands that. We have a deep respect for our medical community, and by and large, our community has been able to see through the politics and understand what it takes to save our neighbors and our loved ones' lives, and help our community at the same time.
It seems like, as I've been watching from afar, and obviously we all have our own issues to deal with as CEOs in our own respective businesses, that the sense of community is really up front and center in your leadership. Is that guiding everything that you're doing? Are you thinking about building and maintaining a community, or how do you see our community during this crisis?
Yeah, I think that the phrase that I wish would persist a little bit more, that's apropos, that everyone was saying from the very start, is that we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. It is so true, and it's true about everything that we do as a city, that I am my brother's keeper. We are all in this together. The things that you do on one side of town are going to affect your neighbors on another side of town. We are not on an island, and so the community is definitely a part of the message. And the work or the behaviors that I do to protect myself are going to impact the people around me. And so that's what we've tried to share. And thankfully, as San Antonians, we know there's no shortage of examples of community working together. The images of the lines at the food bank, which are the image of the pandemic, not just in San Antonio but across the country, are important, and equally as important are the images on the other side of that, of the volunteers that are streaming out to help their neighbors in need. So we show time and again through crisis, we come together as a community, and that's the formula for us getting through.
So let me ask you, because I do think you have a strong sense of community, certainly in how you approach people and your empathy and your thoughtfulness and your eye and your lens on policy. So how do you respond when some people in the community don't agree with you? And some people make it personal, or and there's the other side where people think we're overstepping our bounds, or you may be overstepping your bounds in local government. How do you reconcile that personally? And I ask this question before you answer, because I have young students on the call that want to understand what you have to deal with when you are making tough decisions in any leadership role.
Yeah, well, how do I deal with decisions that need to be made when people disagree? Let me tell you, I have a lot of practice, and you get better as you go along. But it's politics, and unfortunately, in a political position, there are going to be people that disagree. And so, I think part of it is just to be true to who you are, and who I am is hopefully a leader who is making every decision in the best interest of the community. There are things, like I said, there are things that we hear from our public health professionals that we just don't want to hear. And I know it's not going to be popular when we try to deal with it. Let me tell you how hard it was to labor over the decision back in, I think, 6 months ago, almost today, to have to close down restaurants and bars. That was a very difficult decision because I knew the impacts of it. It meant that people were likely going to lose their jobs. Yeah. But I also knew the flip side of that, based on our medical professionals' guidance, was that if we didn't do that, meant that a lot of people were going to lose their lives. And so we try to take a step back and think about what's in the best interests of the community. It does mean that, there are, let me put it this way. If the decision were important and it meant that you might lose your job as an elected leader because the decision that you had to make was important but unpopular, you should be willing to walk away from your job. That's the perspective I've always had. And, my feeling is I'm blessed to be in this position, but I'm in this position to do important work for the community, and it's for that reason, not any other.
So when it comes to personal attacks, you just move on.
Yeah.
Is that how you
you
think about it?
Yeah, and it sometimes means you have to shut down social media and let somebody else worry about it for a while.
It's so true. It's easy to say anything you want on social media, right? So I think that's really good advice. You just have to move on.
But these conversations are so incredibly important. And hopefully, because of the pandemic, we're having these Zoom meetings where you can have intimate conversations with a lot of people all the time. And maybe that's one of the takeaways. And this, to me, should be as much a part of our social media consumption as anything else. Let's have some actual conversations.
Right. So let's talk for a minute about George Floyd. How did you saw the same thing we all saw on the video, and the murder of George Floyd, and then the protests that ensued on top of everything else that you were dealing with. How did you think about that personally, as well as then your role as a national leader?
Well, first of all, it's horrific. And I think the graphic nature of the video and just how visceral the experience is to watch, another African-American being murdered by a police officer, or in this case, several in a city, is an experience that I think we have to pay attention to and force ourselves not to look away. The protests, to me, there's a lot of things to say about them. Number one, and this is something I've tried to express on numerous occasions, it was a recognition that these frustrations of having to come back to issues and ask for attention and reform when we've been asking, people have been asking for years and years and years. The reason why you saw, I think, the level of unrest that you did and that you continue to see is because here we are again. Nothing's changed. The only difference here is that it's a different person being killed. And so I think, number one, as political leaders, as elected leaders, and in my case as a mayor, I have to, number one, be cognizant and recognize that and verbalize that look, we have not done anything. Government has not solved this issue, that there are systemic racial inequities in our community, and that the criminal justice system does target people of color. We have to acknowledge that, commit ourselves to reform, but also accept responsibility. And, I ask for accountability. I still ask for accountability. Part of that accountability is to help folks recognize that if it's true reform and change that we're after, it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick. And so people need a place to put their anger and frustrations. And I ask them to put it on me as the leader of this city so that it's not misdirected and it doesn't have, collateral damage. I recognize the frustration, and frustration can be a very dangerous thing, but I want them to focus it on the people who can make a change and make a difference in our systems, in this case, in our local government and criminal justice system. And one of those key people is me. And I accept that, and I'll continue to bear that until we actually do provide some reforms. We've made some reforms, use of force policies. We've got a lot of work to do to get a fair police union contract. And then there's other things that we have to do in cooperation with state and federal legislators. But it's, I guess, in summary, no one should have been surprised at the level of unrest, nor should they have been shocked by what happened when we saw the videos of George Floyd. And I hope we don't go back to the way we were.
I really appreciated in those initial protests, there were quite a few young people there, and I know they were all ages, I know, but there were quite a few young people there, and I know some of them were our college students, and I really appreciated that you tried to engage in conversation with young people, all people, but young people in particular, because I think we all know young people can change the future trajectory, just like you did when you were a young professional thinking about where you are today. So have you been able to maintain some new focus groups or some new committee rapport that's allowing for this sort of conversation, just to keep everyone engaged, kind of back to your sense of community with everything else that was going on with those surges and such?
Yeah, we have. That's been a challenge, and it's in part because there's so many different groups and organizations that are engaged in the effort. One of the challenges to help, find some common threads in the reforms that are being asked for. There's been a great conversation and debate about this idea of defunding police, for instance, which is one of the threads that have come out of the movement. Others are use of force, transparency, contract issues. So there's many different groups with many different missions and objectives that we have to kind of bring together and create some policy agenda. In terms of the actual focus groups, I've been immensely grateful for the tireless work that Councilmember Melissa Cabello-Howard has done as the chair of public safety. She's been having forums and hearings weekly with groups. I've been able to join her at many of those. There's a lot of organic town halls and things that are popping up. And then, of course, there's a lot of veterans in the criminal justice reform movement. I think about people like Mario Salas, a former council member, who I've been able to visit a lot with, who are also trying to provide some, experience to younger people. And let me just say one other thing, Dr. Matson, is I agree with you about the younger generation. It used to be that I could call myself one of them. I can't anymore. But if you look at major cultural change that needs to take place in this country. The only reason why we're talking about, or the only real reason why it's sustained conversation, is because of young people. The March for Science, the issues of climate change and climate adaptation, young people are leading that march. Gun sense and gun reform, reforming our gun control laws and ensuring that guns don't end up, in the wrong hands. That is being led by young people because they've been shot to death in their own schools. We talk about, the Me Too movement. That is young people driving that. And now criminal justice reform, it's being sustained by young people. My hope for those movements is that working together, we can be sure who allies are, and begin to work to bring folks into the conversation, so that we can achieve reforms and not, we don't see it fade off into the distance again.
So you're doing everything, and I know you have we're going to end here in just a moment. You're doing everything. How are you finding time to de-stress, to spend with your family, maybe what are you doing to help remain grounded? Because you sound grounded, level-headed, solid advice to our students. How are you keeping that together?
It's hard, I will tell you that. And I don't have as much time with my family as I'd like. One unfortunate benefit, though, of us all being cooped up is that they're there whenever I get home. And there's nowhere else to go but home when I'm done with the day. Unfortunately, it ends pretty late.
Yes.
So we just figure out how to make it work. Jonah's been distance learning, and Erica's been working from home mostly. So we have our movie time when we can, even though I have one eye on the work. And then I got some gym equipment that was in the shed, and I put it in the garage, so I've got access to that. That's how I de-stress.
Well, thank you for spending time with us. Any final words you want to say to our students?
No, thank you very much, President Matson and the Texas A&M San Antonio team. To the students, I'm proud of you. I can't see you on the screen, but I can't imagine being a college student right now and having to go through a pandemic where social distancing is part of our way of life. I'm sorry you have to go through that, but I want to thank you for leading the charge. As difficult as it is on elected officials and leaders in political office, and I'm speaking, experiencing this, as difficult as it is to be held accountable, we need to be held accountable. And I appreciate you driving the movements that you are, criminal justice reform, racial equity. Please keep doing that. And, I think our communities will be better off for it. And then don't forget to vote on November 3rd. Our city, our nation, our world is depending on young people to vote on November 3rd. And if we do, I think we can restore dignity to our country. And thank you for helping us with that.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mayor. Thank you for helping us launch the Leadership Loop podcast. We appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, all.
Right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
That was very exciting and very insightful. I did not know that he had his 9/11 experience, his college experience, the challenges of leadership. It's a term I call leadership oppression, when people attack you and try to sabotage or discredit you, and how do you stand up to that? So guys, I'm hoping that you all can ask questions in the chat box now.
Let me turn to the PLC for a moment. So I want you to know, while I didn't exactly phrase the questions the way you phrased them, I had studied your questions to weave them into the conversation that he was sharing. So I think I covered all of what you had, but if not, please feel free to give me any insight as to how we can do this a little differently or better. We were supposed to have Judge Wolf on as well, but evidently there's the Zooms of the world today. There's just a lot of, I call it the internet traffic. the internet is just having a problem today and we couldn't get the judge on. So I will try to get him back on for you because the two of them together are really quite dynamic. But I do think the mayor shared so much in his conversation with you. So I hope you found that useful. So open up and Dr. Mahdi, I'll turn back to you.
I'm looking at the chat box and I'm asking you all for questions, thoughts, and any reactions to social change messages that you heard from the mayor and from Dr. Matson. So Jules said, I'd love to do this again. I think it was an amazing discussion. I liked at the end how he said he has to be true to himself. And I think that as leaders, that's important. And in social change, that's the consciousness of self, which is knowing what your beliefs are and sticking to those. Another important C is commitment. And I think you saw that in his passion in all of his work, that he's very committed to the community, to doing the right thing, to safety, to
What did the students think? You know, we started the discussion asking him about what his college experience was like. Was there anything that he shared that you found relatable?
Come on, leaders, don't be shy.
Adamari, what did you think? I'm going to start going down this list. Adamari, what did you think? I want to see in the chat box. I know you had some struggles on your first semester. Any thoughts? How about Adriana? Just a couple of Adrianas.
I love that he said he didn't know what he was doing until he had a son. That's being a real grown-up. When he mentioned he didn't know what he wanted to do until he was in his 30s, I was really relieved to hear. Yes, he talked about being lonely his first year, and I definitely feel that a bit. It's a relief seeing that he too wasn't sure what he wanted to pursue in his career. I thought it was great to see how he's basically one of us and had to learn how to study. I related to him talking about how we didn't think that we would have enough time in the day to complete all the assignments. We've been covering time management with the freshmen. So.
Hey, time management will be with you for the rest of your life. I tell everyone, time management truly is a skill.
Planning out 15 minutes intervals was impressive and concerning. A little over compulsive. Feeling intimidated his freshman year. College is a different playing field.
I think this idea of compartmentalizing, he did talk about that. I think it's Aisha who says something about how he's compartmentalizing that. It's something that you'll find that even as you get older, you still have a lot coming at you. You just might have more control over what you have coming at you. Sometimes you still have to compartmentalize to keep moving forward and pushing through. So what did you think about what he said about Black Lives Matter when he talked about some of that racial injustice and social injustice and defunding the police? Was there anything in there that you found relevant or relatable, or you thought we're all sort of struggling with how do you reconcile some of what's happening in our society today?
Majesty. He was incredibly concise about his points and seemed progressive in his perspective. I was awed by his understanding of concerns. I appreciated how he gave credit to young people for Me Too and gun violence, and there really are a lot of important social movements that young people are at the forefront of.
Julie says too that she appreciated that he referenced the internships. Which I thought that was really powerful too, on and how his his experiences. I think he was a fellow at Nirenberg that he was talking about when he was here in San Antonio dealing with what was going on in New York, and certainly the reflections of Mayor Giuliani, and it's a whole different conversation.
Dylan says, I enjoyed how he acknowledged the frustrations of those who protested.
Mm-hmm. Was there anybody in the PLC that was down at the protests?
When he talked about Black Lives Matter movement, it was enlightening. I liked his point of view. I want them to direct their feelings towards me as the leader of the community.
He did do that. I watched him on the nightly news and some of those broadcasts. So let me ask you, how many of you watched any of the nightly, it's on television, but you can watch it on Facebook Live, or I think I said TVSA and other social media streams, these nightly broadcasts he does with Judge Wolf and somebody from the Public Health Department. Adamari, good. Have any of you watched them? I see Adamari says yes. I think it's a really powerful lesson in leadership if you haven't had a chance to watch some of those. They cut them off on the nightly news, but it's pretty nice to watch the live streams. Good. I'll let the mayor know that many of you young people are watching them.
I stop what I'm doing. I get out of the kitchen and I just pay attention for those few minutes to see what's going on.
Mm.
So Dr. Matson, somebody asked, how has the pandemic affected your work and personal life workflow? You're a leader of a big organization.
Well, I'm certainly impacted by the pandemic in terms of some of the things the mayor said about trying to keep the communication flow when you're doing all of this virtually and remotely, keeping in mind all of you as students, the importance of what your education means to you and whatever you might be experiencing at home, that we know that how you receive instruction digitally, how you learn how to learn in this new modality is important. What are safe spaces for you is important to us. And I appreciated that the mayor apologized for some of the experiences that you're having to go through, because we feel that too, that we're having to work around instead of giving you the true experiences that you would always have. And so for me, my mornings are a little bit earlier and my nights are a little bit longer, even though I'm not out running around all over the community. There is so much disruption to our day-to-day work that we have to think about everything different. So it's more than an inconvenience. So for me, it's been a lot of time thinking about what's in the best interest of our students and how do we deliver that with the faculty and staff that we have on board and keeping everybody safe.
So another question for you, how do you personally separate work from your personal life in the pandemic?
You know, that's actually been a lot harder. Even though I come to the university to work, I've come pretty much every day, almost every day. When I go home now, I'm working at home too. I always worked at home, but it's more intense. The work is more intense. So I feel like there's no other distractions. And remember when we were sheltered at home, so to speak, there was nothing else to do. So the days just got longer. But I will tell you, in my personal life, like you're doing as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, I also think about goals and goal setting. During the pandemic, I have written a book chapter recently. As you know, I've started writing for Forbes Women, or if you don't know, I've started writing for Forbes Women. So some other things to think about my personal goals and how else can I share my message. I think also in terms of the pandemic itself, for all of you, I would share that I understand and appreciate the grieving process. I think I shared with you in the first conversation we had that I lost my dad during the pandemic. Not as a direct result of the pandemic, but it was tangential result of the pandemic. That my dad spent over 3 weeks isolated by himself in the hospital due to an injury he had had. And it was the aftermath of that injury that he never recovered from. And he came home in hospice. And we were at home with him when he passed. But he didn't leave that way. So it was really hard to not only watch that, but almost to grieve in isolation because you can't be with your loved ones the same way that you would want to be. And no matter how old you are, you will always miss your dad. And I'll tell you, I miss my dad. And that's part of how I feel about the pandemic and what I'm going to remember about 2020. So I share that with you.
How are you doing self-care, Dr. Matson?
So this is interesting, you guys. I'm not always the best at it, but I try hard. I'm getting back into my exercise routine. Earlier in the summer, I had a biking accident, and I was trying to be discreet about it, but I'm still recovering. So I would share with you all that has definitely impacted my self-care, because I appreciate, it's very different. You all know this. It's way different to work out on a treadmill versus, being outside and experiencing nature and freeing your mind. So that has been a struggle for me, that I don't have that open road perspective where I can really be free with my thoughts and alone with my thoughts. And it's not the same when you're inside a facility. So that has made self-care for me a little bit harder. Trying to, like you guys, I'm trying not to eat everything in sight or eat out of boredom or whatever the case may be. That's also hard. So I'm trying to reconcile all those things. And now that it's not so hot, I'm trying to get out. And even if I just walk the campus, I walk the campus because I want to experience what you experience. I want to see what you see. When I walk through the parking lots or when I walk through buildings, it gives me a sense of what I call how the buildings behave and how people behave inside buildings. And I think that's part of my leadership lens, to be connected to you all, because I know all of you, except for the new freshman class. I know all of you and I miss you all. And so I do think about you and how your experiences are being impacted by what's happening here. And I consider all of that part of my self-care.
So that's a challenge to our freshman PLC members. That's why we sent you an email earlier, so we can introduce you to Dr. Matson and have some more interactions.
Okay, Madi, it's 4:30, Dr. Madi. I'm going to have to sign off.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Matson.
So
And
will these comments be saved? Because I would love to share some of these with the mayor, so he can understand the kind of impact he's had.
So I want to wish you all well and have a great weekend and be safe. Nos vemos.